Andy, thank you for sitting down with me. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
Good, good. We're in Saskatoon this week. It's a very blustery day outside. We're here for the Canadian Barley Symposium and the Prairie Grain Development PGDC meetings. Now, you are a wheat breeder for Limagrain Cereals Research Canada. You're also one of our next-gen leaders for this year. Congratulations. You're only 29 years old and you are wheat breeder for LCRC. That's a pretty big accomplishment. Can you talk a little bit about your background, how you got into wheat breeding, why you wanted to be a wheat breeder, and kind of what brought you to where you are today? Can you give us the 411 on that?
Yeah, sounds good. Like we were saying, I was born in Taiwan. Was born in the southern part of Taiwan, and our family used to own a very small sugarcane farm. And, my grandpa was very passionate about agriculture. So I guess that kind of got passed on to me. I've always been interested in plant science, agriculture since I was little. So when I started my undergrad, I went to University of Toronto to do my undergrad. So I did a lot of plant science courses when I was younger. And then when I finished my undergrad, I was like, oh, I really want to do more plant science. And that's when I look into opportunities at the University of Guelph. And then I met Dr. Ali Navabi, who was the winter wheat breeder back in the day. So I was very fortunate to get a research technician position with him over the summer. And that's when I discovered plant breeding. I didn't know what plant breeding was when I was doing my undergrad, but that's when I discovered plant breeding, and it was just so fascinating, the idea of being able to use genetics to improve crops and the potential of that to bring benefits to the growers, but to a country as a whole. So then I decided to pursue my master's degree with Ali in wheat breeding. Back then I was working in winter wheat. And after 2.5 years, I was also fortunate enough to be able to get another opportunity to study in the UK to further my, understanding of wheat genetics and how that can be applied to benefit wheat breeding. And at the end of my study, I was actually quite fortunate. I was just doing a public presentation. So usually we talk to the growers in the UK about the projects that we're doing in the lab and how this can potentially translate to bigger impacts on farm. And I was able to meet one of my bosses, Jason Reinheimer, who was the wheat breeder back in the day for LCRC. And we got to chatting, and then he told me about, there's an opportunity that just came up in Canada with LCRC in wheat breeding. And I was very interested, being able to have the opportunity to come back home, but also the opportunity to contribute to Canadian agriculture. So I interviewed for the position, and I was very lucky to be able to get the position. And I started about 3 or 4 months ago at LCRC in Saskatoon. And this is my first PGDC meeting. Very happy to be part of it.
Now, speaking of genetics, what is your main focus in the wheat breeding program right now?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of wheat breeding, for Canada, we have a very direct focus, because for any lines to be recommended for registration in Canada, they need to fit a certain profile. So obviously my primary goals are focused around those profiles. So some of the biggest traits that we're looking at: yield, of course, lodging resistance, maturity, but also resistance to some of the bigger disease in Canada. So the 5 priority 1 disease, Fusarium head blights, the rust, and also bunts as well. And in addition to that, Canadian wheats is known around the world for being just top shelf in terms of end use quality. So that's definitely another focus for our breeding program as well. But in addition to these that are required for Canadian registration, we're also looking into traits for the future, right? So we're looking at how can we improve drought tolerance in our wheat line? What are some of the locations that we can put our early generation in to get a better understanding of whether or not our lines can survive droughts or having less water during the growing period. And in addition to that, we're also looking into disease for the future. So on top of the 5 priority 1 disease, we're also looking into resistance in septoria, resistance towards bacterial leaf streaks. And I think these are going to be very useful, maybe not for now, but for the future. And it's very important for us to look into the future as well, because the breeding pipeline takes so long, right? Our idea starts now, but we're not going to see the finished products for another 8 or 9 years. So we need to kind of look forward into what's going to be the next big thing for weeds and be prepared for that. Yeah.
So you're breaking some new ground, Andy, in that the vast majority of wheat breeding programs in Canada are public sector wheat breeding programs. LCRC has one of the only private sector wheat breeding programs in the country. What advantages would you say the private breeding model might have in comparison to the traditional public breeding model?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. You're right. In wheat breeding, there's not a lot of private company per se. To my understanding, we might be one of the very last wheat private programs that are still breeding in Canada. So in terms of the advantage of being in a company like Limagrain, is that Limagrain is a cooperative of farmers, right? So we always have farmers' interests in heart, but at the same time, Limagrain is also an international entity. So we have breeding program in Spain, we have breeding program in South America, such as Argentina. So we have access. We were able to access germplasm from different areas of the world. And genetic diversity is always going to be a very important part for breeding program. Can we bring in better germplasm for other parts of the countries and make sure that they're adapted to Canadian growing condition? So I think that's one of the things that's very good about being at an international company, is that we have access to germplasm from different parts of the world. And also being in a bigger company as well is we have access to capacity for genotyping, right? So one of the biggest breakthrough, one of the biggest tool in wheat breeding nowadays is genomic selection. Essentially being able to predict how the lines will be performed in the field just based on DNA data. So if you've done 23andMe, it's very similar to that, right? So you look at DNA, and you're saying this line is more likely to be successful in the field in the future. And essentially that can help us make better early generation decision in the future. And I think being in a big company, having that capacity will allow us more readily to bring this technology into breeding program and be able to translate that into values for the farmer quicker in comparison to other public breeding program. But that being said, I met with other public breeding program, whether from the AFC or from the universities, and they are getting into that field as well. So we do have that advantage now, but I don't know how long we can hold on to that. Yeah.
Andy, we've spoken before about LCRC's breeding timeline. Would you say you've been able to bring down from the traditional, say, about 12 years from the first crosses to coming to market? You've brought that down to about 8 years approximately. How would you say you've done that?
So I just want to give credits to my predecessors, because they truly are some of the trailblazer in wheat breeding in terms of in LCRC. But essentially how we're able to do that is we have dedicated glasshouse facility that allows us to cycle through early generation a lot faster. And in addition to that, like I was touching on earlier, we have genomic selection capability, which will allow us to basically make early generation selection that can improve some of the traits that we're looking for in Canada as a whole. In addition to that, we also have very, more of a progressive breeder seed production strategy. So when we're doing our registration testing, we're also producing seeds on the sites, breeder seeds on the sites. So essentially, once the lines are registered, we usually can have larger amount of seeds in comparison to, let's say, a public breeding program, which might be more conservative in terms of their seed production strategy. So that's how we're able to essentially cut down our, I guess, breeding cycles and our time to commercial to about 8 to 9 years. Yeah.
Now, like I said earlier, we're here at PGDC this year. This is where big meeting that happens where new lines are voted on, put forward to the federal government to be registered as varieties. LCRC is putting forward 8 lines, I believe, and we won't know until the end of the week which lines are recommended for registration, but can you give us some insight into what makes these lines so innovative?
Yeah, for sure. It's also my first year at PGDC, so definitely very excited about being here and being able to represent the 8 lines that we have pushed through registration. Essentially, I would say these 8 lines are, if you want to call a wheat line Canadian, I think these 8 wheat lines would look very Canadian. Essentially, Canadian lines are what people would call a very balanced profile. Good yielding potential, adequate disease package that are combined with really excellent end use quality. And I think that perfectly describes our 8 lines. These 8 lines have, I guess, some of the best end use quality profile that we have seen in our breeding program. On top of that, some of them carry adequate and good disease package to some of these priority 1 disease that are very important for Canada, such as Fusarium. And it also has just overall outstanding agronomic characteristic. Either they have really good yield potential, or they have really good lodging resistance, or they are maybe a few days earlier than some of the checks that we're looking at in our program. So in general, I would say these 8 lines are very balanced. They are, what people would say, very Canadian-like. In addition to that, one of our line carry the SL1 gene, which will confer resistance to orange wheat blossom midge. So that's gonna, again, bring value to the farmers as well. Yeah.
As I said earlier, you're one of our next gen leaders for 2024. What's your advice to aspiring young plant breeders? If you think about someone like yourself, when you first started out, who's just starting out today, who wants to get into plant breeding, what's your top piece of advice to them for how they can be successful in this?
Right. To be honest, when you say advice, I don't think I'm quite at the place to be give people advice, because I'm also just starting out and very grateful for the opportunity to be considered as a next gen leader in the industry. But I guess part of just speaking from experience, I would recommend the next generation breeder to be bold, just to not be afraid to speak up, to not be afraid to look for opportunities to collaborate, to be and to just speak up and say you want to be part of the industry, you want to contribute. And I think overall, people in the industry recognize that. People in the industry, when they see that you're coming in, you're full of energy, they're very receptive. They will support your growth, and then they will help you develop into a plant breeders that you want to be. For example, I was talking about my master supervisors, right? When I told him I want to be a plant breeder, he has always been very supportive. He has, make sure that when we're making selection, I'm in the field, I'm getting to know how the things happen, how the selection happen, how the planting happen. I've sit on the combine to harvest. I've sit on the seeder to harvest. So, yeah, just be bold, and then trying to find opportunities where you can contribute to the program, and I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's good advice. Good note to end on. Thank you for sitting down with me, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation today.